I'm John Levy. I know many of you. I'm so very privileged to be the 10th chair of the board of directors of the Legal Services Corporation, and as a lifelong Midwesterner, it's very special for me to be back here in one of the great cities of the American heartland, which was a long-time home to my late father-in-law, to commemorate an important milestone, LSC's 50th anniversary. Today, we will hear remarks from some of Minnesota's most distinguished civic and judicial leaders, including Chief Justice Natalie Hudson, Chief Deputy Attorney General John Keller, Government Affairs and Public Policy Coordinator for the Attorney General's Office, Abdulaziz Mohammed. Senator Klobuchar couldn't be with us today, but has sent a video, and Minnesota Congressman and House Majority Whip Tom Emmer has provided us with special remarks to be read shortly. Our program also features 3 terrific panels. The first, moderated by LSC President Ron Flagg, examines the debt burden of Minnesotans and ways to relieve it. The second, moderated by Justice North's Executive Director Dory Rappaport, explores how paraprofessionals and others can help narrow the justice gap. And the third, moderated by LSC board member Lori Mikva, examines why access to justice is important to business and civic leaders. We gather here today just 2 days before LSC turns 50, because it was on July 25th, 1974, that President Richard M. Nixon signed the law creating the Legal Services Corporation. And today, LSC is the nation's largest source of funding for civil legal assistance for the nation's low-income population. It is a leading innovator in legal technology and pro bono, and it's developing models for partnerships that help this significant population maintain their livelihoods, keep a roof over their heads, and escape domestic violence. During these past 50 years, LSC has created an extraordinary network of providers covering the entire country with 130 grantees, more than 900 offices, and employing over 10,000 lawyers and paraprofessionals. And here in Minnesota, LSC supports 5 such outstanding programs, and last year granted to them over $6 million, which on average was about a quarter of their budgets. Well, today's program is part of LSC's ongoing 50th anniversary outreach effort to continue raising awareness and greater understanding across our country of the importance of access to justice and the gravity of the crisis that exists for low-income Americans, and we are particularly focusing on our country's persistent failure to make equal access to justice in our civil justice system a reality for so many Americans. As LSC's 2022 Justice Gap Study starkly quantifies this failure, and it sums up the dire situation. Low-income Americans do not receive any or enough legal help for 92% of their substantial civil legal problems. Our grantees, unfortunately, must turn away as many eligible individuals as they assist because of a lack of resources. So although we appreciate that for this fiscal year, Congress maintained LSC's funding at $560 million, clearly much, much more is needed to close the nation's justice gap after so many years of underfunding. In 1994, 30 years ago, Congress appropriated $400 million for LSC. Well, you can see our current appropriation has not remotely kept up with inflation, population growth, the after effects of the COVID pandemic, or many other issues confronting our country's low-income population, and that is why our bipartisan board unanimously requested from Congress $1.8 billion for LSC's fiscal year 2025 budget. Such an increase would make a world of difference for LSC and its grantees, and it would help our country more fully live up to a core American value. You know, our founders believed that ensuring equal access to justice was what Thomas Jefferson called the most sacred of duties of a government. George Washington called the firmest pillar of good government. Even in a more fundamental sense, equal access to justice girds the very foundation of our democratic government, the rule of law. As Texas Chief Justice Nathan Heck powerfully observed just 2 weeks ago in his testimony at an extraordinary Senate hearing on the justice gap. I quote him, "Unmet needs for basic civil legal services, the justice gap, direly impact people's lives, court processes and efficiency, the economy and society. I must add, as a steward of judicial office, that the justice gap also threatens the integrity of the rule of law itself, suggesting that it applies not to all and not equally as promised, but only to people of means," unquote. Well, LSC's mission of expanding access to justice, it's not an act of charity, nor an exercise in social engineering. It is an investment in the stability of American democracy and ultimately the rule of law. Well, a prominent Minnesotan, Vice President Walter Mondale, recognized this imperative even before LSC existed, when in 1971 he co-sponsored bipartisan legislation to create a national legal services operation. And I quote him, "If the poor and powerless do not have free access to our legal system, government by law is a failure," he said during the floor debate. And then in 2015, here in Minneapolis at an LSC event, 40 years after the creation of LSC, Vice President Mondale called on us to do more, warning that only with, and I quote him again, "a new commitment to equal access will our country's promise of justice, reflected in our Constitution and the closing words of the Pledge of Allegiance, really be what it should be for all Americans," unquote. But we are nowhere near liberty and justice for all. Instead, we're falling victim to another warning, Judge Learned Hand's famous admonition: if we are to keep our democracy, there must be one commandment: thou shalt not ration justice. But rationing justice is precisely what we're being forced to do. As Nicole Nelson, the CEO of Frontline Justice and former head of Alaska Legal Services, said in her own compelling testimony at the Senate hearing 2 weeks ago, and I quote her, "Legal aid is so vastly underfunded that it is forced to turn away one person for everyone they represent, not because the cases lack merit, and not because they aren't serious consequences at stake, but because of lack of resources. those who have dedicated their lives to doing their work are turning into gatekeepers who have to ration justice. Well, in closing, I want to recall the words of two presidents reflecting on the importance of LSC. The one who ushered it in, Richard Nixon, and the one who is in office today as we mark our 50th anniversary, Joe Biden. Of the LSC Act that he signed on July 25th, 1974, Richard Nixon said, "We have learned that legal assistance for the poor, when properly provided, is one of the most constructive ways to help them help themselves." He said, "We propose simply to protect and preserve a basic right for all Americans." Well, Joe Biden was actually the presiding officer of the United States Senate when it passed the LSC Act on January 31, 1974, and has remained committed to the corporation throughout his long career, appearing at numbers of LSC events, and at LSC Forum 8 years ago, he called LSC a passion of his, extolled the vital services it provides our country, and concluded his remarks with a personal observation: what his mother would say about it. This is what my mother would ask if she were here. What would we do without you? What would we do? Well, as we commemorate LSC's 50th anniversary and look in just a few years to the 250th birthday of the founding of our country, it is absolutely imperative that we move quickly beyond rationing justice, protect the rule of law, and ensure equal access to justice for all Americans. Folks, this crisis is happening on our watch, and it is solvable in our time, and we owe no less to future generations of Americans. Thank you very much. It's now my honor to introduce and invite Jessie Nicholson to the podium. Although I imagine most of you here already know her, she's the Chief Executive Officer of Southern Minnesota Regional Legal Services. You know it as SMERLS. Based in St. Paul, it provides free civil legal aid to low-income families and individuals across 33 counties in southern Minnesota. Jessie and her dynamic team of more than 50 attorneys and 45 additional staff, as well as other partners, serve 10,000 people every year. Well, Jessie joined SMERLS 35 years ago as a staff attorney before she assumed various leadership roles and becoming CEO in 2007. What a privilege to welcome you to the podium, Jessie.
Thank you, John, for that wonderful introduction. And good afternoon, everybody. A little more, come on. A little more energy. Anyway, it's my pleasure this afternoon to be able to introduce today the Honorable Natalie Hudson, Chief Justice of the Minnesota Supreme Court. Chief Justice Hudson first joined Minnesota Supreme Court in 2015 and has served as Chief Justice since 2023. Prior to her appointment to the Supreme Court, Chief Justice Hudson served on the Minnesota Court of Appeals from 2002 to 2015. Before becoming a judge, though, she worked in private practice, She served in the office of the Minnesota Attorney General. She served as an attorney for the city of St. Paul and as an assistant dean to the student affairs at Hamline University School of Law. But more importantly, Chief Justice Hudson began her legal career at Smurls. She is an active member of the Organized Bar Association. She serves on the advisory board of the Minnesota Women Lawyers Association, the Minnesota Association of Black Lawyers, and the Minnesota Association of Black Women Lawyers. She told me to keep this short, but I can't do it, I guess. She also served on the implementation committee on multicultural diversity and racial fairness in the courts and the Minnesota Supreme Court's Racial Bias Task Force and the Minnesota Legal Services Planning Committee. And there's one more thing I'd like to have you know. When when Chief Justice Hudson, was at Smurls, I started at Smurls the month before she left. So she and I were both housing attorneys at the same time at Smurls. I took her place, and then she went on to do all these wonderful things that I just mentioned. So she's been my close personal friend for many, many years, and I just wanted you all to know that she came from Smurls and how our paths crossed that early on in our careers. So it's my pleasure at this time to introduce Chief Justice Natalie Hudson.
Thank you, Jesse. You know, Mr. Levi was kind of on the edge of suggesting you were old. But he knows you. Okay, Jesse said he knows that she is. But I'm older than her. Yes, and so, because as she said, she took my place at Smurl, so I was already there. And so I'm older than you, but it's all good. It's all good. It's all good. Thank you, Jesse, for that warm welcome. And I am honored to be here today and to serve as Chief Justice of the Minnesota Supreme Court. It is just a privilege to be here with all of you at this very, very important event and to join such a distinguished group of leaders and professionals. And I extend my sincere gratitude to the Legal Services Corporation for organizing this forum and for its unwavering commitment to protecting the promise of justice to all Americans. And as we gather here today, we are surrounded by esteemed judges, dedicated attorneys, and passionate leaders and stakeholders from the civil legal aid community. Your collective efforts are crucial in our shared mission to close the justice gap and ensure that every individual, regardless of their income, has access to the legal resources that they need. And today, as you've heard, we celebrate a significant milestone, the 50th anniversary of the Legal Services Corporation. And this anniversary is not just a marker of time, but a testament to the profound impact that LSC has had on countless lives, delivering justice and hope to those who need it most. Indeed, since its inception, LSC has stood as the largest single funder of civil legal aid for low-income Americans, ensuring that the promise of equal justice under the law is not just a lofty ideal, but a living reality for millions of people. Over the past, somebody was about to clap. That is worth a clap. Over the past 5 decades, LSC has provided vital legal assistance to those facing some of the most challenging circumstances imaginable, whether it's helping a family keep their home, ensuring a veteran receives the benefits that they've earned, or protecting individuals from domestic violence. The work of LSC has had life-changing impacts across the nation. But despite these remarkable achievements, our work is far from over, and Mr. Levi alluded to some of these statistics. Today, we still face a significant justice gap. I would say it's a chasm. We know that 92% of the legal needs of low-income Americans are not being met, And it is a reminder that our efforts must continue with renewed vigor and determination. America was founded on the promise of equal justice for all, yet this promise is shattered when people are powerless to actually exercise those rights. LSC's mission to protect this promise is more crucial than ever, and it is incumbent upon all of us to support and sustain this mission. I must tell you, as Jesse already alluded to, civil legal aid has always held a special place in my heart. My journey in the legal profession began in 1982, before Jesse, as a staff attorney with one of our local civil legal aid organizations, Southern Minnesota Regional Legal Services, which we affectionately here in Minnesota call SMERLS. During those early years, I had the privilege of representing indigent clients in housing matters. And this role was not just a job for me, it was an opportunity to ensure that even the most vulnerable members of our community had equal access to justice and to ensure that their rights were upheld by our justice system. In fact, for me, working at SMERLS was a transformative experience. It opened my eyes to the profound barriers that low-income individuals face when navigating the legal system. It opened my eyes to the way our complex legal system sometimes robs those on the margins of their very dignity and humanity. Most of all, it taught me the importance of strong advocacy and the impact that dedicated legal assistance can have on someone's life. Ensuring access to the courts for those who would otherwise be voiceless became a guiding principle in my career and has stayed with me throughout my career and instilled in me a lifelong commitment to fairness, to equity, and to justice for all. And I am not alone in that commitment. In Minnesota, we are fortunate to have a robust civil legal aid system, and I'm proud to be a part of a state that prioritizes the needs of its most vulnerable citizens. In many ways, Minnesota is a national leader in the delivery of civil legal services, though we are far from the ultimate goal of closing the civil justice gap, even here in Minnesota. During the rest of my time here, I'm going to highlight just 3 key factors that I think have made Minnesota a national leader in this area, and some of the efforts that we currently have underway to ensure that equal access to justice in our state continues to be a reality. The first of those factors is a long-standing, bipartisan, whole-of-government support for civil legal aid in the state of Minnesota. Minnesota's commitment to civil legal aid dates back to 1982, when the state first began providing funding to support these essential services. Today, state legislative funding remains by far the largest source of financial support for our civil legal aid institutions. We are especially grateful for the major commitment our state legislature made in 2023 when lawmakers made a historic investment to support civil legal services. In a single legislative session, we witnessed state funding for civil legal aid increase by more than 80%. The primary focus of this funding was to address salary disparities, to reduce turnover, and build capacity within our legal aid organizations. And we are already starting to see the impact of that investment. Turnover rates among civil legal aid attorneys have fallen significantly, as higher wages have made these positions more attractive and more sustainable for people. Additionally, we've been able to add nearly 50 full-time employees across the state, significantly enhancing our ability to meet the legal needs of low-income Minnesotans. The second key factor is the steadfast backing of the Minnesota Supreme Court. And I just want to say thank you to, I see several of my colleagues here from the court, Justice Procaccini, Justice Moore, and Justice Hennessy. And I know that I speak for the entire court when I say this is a court and has been a court for many years, not just the current court, but has been a court that has stood behind the efforts of civil legal aid and has championed those efforts and tried to do its best to make sure that all Minnesotans have a place at the table. And so for decades, as I said, our court has taken decisive steps to ensure that civil legal organizations can operate efficiently and effectively. Recently, our court led a multi-year effort to ensure that all legal aid programs receiving state funds participate in a coordinated intake system. This means that potential legal aid clients no longer need to research or spend hours on the phone trying to figure out, where do I go? How do I find help? Where's the nearest office to me? We got rid of that through the hard work of many, many people. And now there is a single toll-free phone number and an online system that people can access that automatically connects them with their local civil legal aid provider. And then going back even to 2018, the court expanded access to online court records and information so that our state legal services providers could register to use a tool that we call Minnesota Government Access, which is the same online tool that our prosecutors and public defenders have access to. And that way they are able to access court records. And this expanded access to online records has facilitated more effective legal representation for legal aid clients. And the third key factor is the unprecedented partnership between our civil legal aid providers and the state's court system. The strength of that partnership was demonstrated over the past several years as our court, like many courts around the country, navigated the COVID-19 pandemic and transitioned much of our work to online courts. During the pandemic, our courts moved the vast majority of our hearings to online courtrooms in order to keep our judges and employees and court users safe. While that transition was, of course, born out of necessity, it quickly became clear that the people we served appreciated the ease and the convenience of remote hearings. Over and over, court users told us that this hybrid approach increased access to justice by reducing the many barriers that arise to attending court hearings in person, such as travel time and parking costs, the need to take time off from work or to find childcare. And as a result, just last week, the Minnesota Judicial Council, which is our governing policymaking body here in Minnesota, permanently adopted this hybrid online/in-person approach. And this new approach has been particularly beneficial for our civil legal aid providers, especially in rural Minnesota, who can now serve a wider range of court users and a broader swath of the state. And perhaps the best and most impactful example of this can be seen in our rural housing courts. For many years, our largest urban counties in Minnesota, they've had these dedicated housing court calendars. And that allowed civil legal aid organizations here in the metro area to be on site during the housing court hearings, and therefore able to serve a wide swath of individuals. And prior to the pandemic, though, when virtually all of our hearings were in person, that same model wasn't possible when you get what we call outstate. Anything outside of the metro area here is called outstate. But that wasn't possible for them. Because you had situations where housing cases were being heard in a courthouse, but that courthouse might be miles away. And sometimes the hearings were hours apart. And as a result, civil legal aid attorneys would spend 2 or 3 hours driving to a rural courthouse to provide representation. But with the transition to remote hearings for many of these housing court matters, many rural judicial districts have established dedicated online housing court calendars where they hear a large number of housing cases on the same calendar in the same online courtroom. This allows a single legal aid attorney to represent many different clients across many different counties on the same day without ever leaving their office. One of the things that's been reported to us from civil legal aid offices is that this multi-county calendaring with online hearings, and I will quote, has been the most impactful access to justice innovation in a generation. expanding legal representation in rural Minnesota. And when I heard that, I was just delighted, because that's what we want to see. We want to make sure that no matter where you are in the state of Minnesota, you have the same access to justice. And in conjunction with our transition to online hearings, our legal aid organizations have also been working to bridge the digital divide for self-represented litigants to ensure that they can efficiently and effectively access online court services. During the pandemic, the Minnesota Legal Services Coalition used federal CARES Act money to create a statewide network of more than 250 legal kiosks. And these kiosks are stationed in various various court, agency, and nonprofit and community locations around the state, providing Minnesotans with the technology they need to interact with civil legal experts. They also offer a space for individuals to attend online court hearings if they lack the necessary technology at home. We also operate a statewide self-help center that assists self-represented litigants by phone and by email, and we have several walk-in self-help centers in our high-traffic courthouses. And there are a number of other efforts that I don't have time to go into today, but we are making and working on this effort, and we are making progress. Another important effort underway in Minnesota that aims to close our civil justice gap is our Legal Paraprofessional Pilot Project. And we are so proud of this at the court. It was an initiative that was started by my predecessor, former Chief Justice Laurie Gilday. Not started by Chief Justice Gilday, but when the idea came to us, the then chief said, we need to do this. And this was a court that got on board immediately and said, yes, we do. We need to be involved in empowering paraprofessionals to help bridge that justice gap. And it is something that on my watch we are going to continue, and the court is fully supportive of. It's an initiative that allows legal paraprofessionals under the supervision of a licensed attorney to provide legal advice and in some cases represent clients in landlord-tenant disputes and family law matters, and potentially we're looking at expanding it to some other legal matters. You're going to be hearing from a panel a little bit later today, and so on this issue, and so I won't go into it in detail here, but the court is very proud of the work that's being done in this pilot project, and we hope to turn it into a permanent project. Finally, let me just say that Minnesota would not be the national leader that it is without the incredible and dedicated attorneys and staff we have serving in our regional civil legal services offices, providing wise counsel and vigorous representation to Minnesotans facing some of the most difficult moments of their lives. Your work is truly essential to the cause of justice in this state, and I thank you. As we reflect on this great progress in Minnesota, again, we know that our work is not complete. Right now, even in Minnesota, there is one private attorney for every 203 Minnesotans who are above our state legal aid guidelines. In stark contrast, there is only one legal aid attorney for every 5,564 Minnesotans below those guidelines. Put another way, if you filled up US Bank Stadium, and for those of you from out of town, you might have passed it, that's our NFL stadium where the Vikings play. If you filled up US Bank Stadium, there would be just 12 attorneys available to meet the pressing needs of every single person sitting in that stadium. Statewide, our civil legal aid organizations are still turning away more than 40% of eligible clients with meritorious cases. They're turning them away due to lack of resources, which speaks to Mr. Levi's point about needing additional funding for LSC. And that's why we continue to fight. That is why we remain steadfast in our struggle for critical funding for our civil legal aid organizations at our state capital, and I hope at your state capitals, wherever you might be from. That is why we are here today to support the work of the Legal Services Corporation, which strives to secure the federal funding that it needs to address this nation's civil justice gap. And so with that, I extend my deepest gratitude to our state legal aid organizations. These are just some amazing people who give up so much and who dedicate so much of their lives to this important work. And I also extend my deepest gratitude to LSC for its pivotal role in supporting these efforts. Together, we are making a real difference in the lives of those in need. We must continue to push forward, driven by the belief that equal access to justice is a fundamental right. Thank you once again to the Legal Services Corporation for hosting this forum, and thanks to all of you for joining us today. Together, we will continue this work towards closing this justice gap and ensuring that the promise of equal justice for all becomes a reality. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Justice Hudson, for those remarks and for your deep and unyielding commitment to access to justice. Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. My name is Ann Hefkin, and I am the Executive Director of Legal Services of Northwest Minnesota. In just a moment, we are going to hear from a panel about how to support Minnesotans that are dealing with consumer debt. This includes enacting laws to offer more protection and helping people avoid the worst consequences of debt. The legal aid community is fortunate to have partners in the Attorney General's office championing this reform, and we're honored to hear from two of them today. I am pleased to introduce Chief Deputy Attorney General John Keller and his colleague Abdulaziz Mohammed. Abdulaziz can join the list of people whose names I've mispronounced. The most recent one is Justice Hennessy, who's on the Minnesota Supreme Court. So hopefully, you can follow in her footsteps. He serves as the Government and Public Policy Coordinator. Chief Deputy Keller is the second-ranking attorney at the Office of the Attorney General. Before his appointment in early 2019, John spent more than 20 years at the Immigrant Law Center of Minnesota, including 14 as executive director. I know many of us in the room know John. He's one of us. He's a legal aider, and we were so sad to lose him in the legal aid community, but thrilled that he joined the Attorney General's office. Abdulaziz Mohammed is a 2023 graduate of the University of Minnesota, where he served as the first Somali American student body president. As student body president, he championed the rights of marginalized students who had food insecurity, housing, and mental health needs. He's in the legal aid community too, you guys. We know he is. He worked as a committee legislative assistant in the Minnesota House of Representatives before joining the Attorney General's office. Thank you both for being here and for your partnership.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's my pleasure to be here. Thanks, Anne, for the warm introduction. It's so good to be back among friends and colleagues and see so many faces that I had the pleasure to work with side by side for more than 23 years. Attorney General Ellison unfortunately was unable to make it, but he was pleased that I could fill in for him today. I'm going to be brief and ask Abdulaziz to share more of the details about the debt protections and the successes that will be the focus of the panel and of our collaborations. I've been at the Attorney General's office for 5.5 years, and as you heard before that, 23 years in the legal aid community. I held almost every job an attorney can hold there, including as a 1L law clerk after my first year of law school. And it is no exaggeration to say that I owe all of you a tremendous amount of gratitude and debt for the opportunity to work beside you, to have the pleasure of building the calluses. Listening to some of the statistics today, I think they are calluses of love and tears when you turn away clients that you know you can help. But for the lack of resources and the lack of colleagues that those resources can maintain. Part of my journey and the values that serve me well in my current role were founded and deepened by my work in legal services. I learned how to be a lawyer after clerking at the Court of Appeals. I learned how to deal with burgeoning caseloads and burnout and self-care, mostly from not practicing self-care and finding that that's not sustainable. I learned the importance of leading with vision and integrity, about justice through learning about injustice, the need to communicate well and to listen even better, and the importance of building strong teams and strategic collaborations. With the right partners, you can take big and strategic risks for the right reasons, always centering decisions on how to get the biggest bang for the effort and how to expand opportunity for clients, communities, constituents. All of these skills are the skills I share with you. I'm proud of the collaboration on consumer protection that we're here to discuss. And through those successes, Minnesota is a stronger place for all communities. Our consumer protection team at the Attorney General's office is a group of analysts. It's unique in Attorney General offices across the country. They exist every working day to take phone calls and receive emails from Minnesotans about problems that they hope we can help them with. Does that sound familiar to this group? That team of predominantly young people, predominantly non-attorneys, find ways to work on consumer debt, hospital debt, issues that affect everyday Minnesotans. And they return to the pockets not only millions of dollars every year, but dignity to individuals who thought had no chance to resolve crushing problems and debt. It made perfect sense for us at the office to collaborate once again with legal aid, to combine the years of accumulated calluses and the remedies that our office had gained and worked on with Minnesotans, and build that into a smart legislative effort to systemically change the playing field. A playing field, if we're honest, in Minnesota that for many, many years was to work exactly as it was working, to benefit the wealthy, to benefit those with counsel, at the cost of those who had neither of those things. My deepest thanks to all of you that helped make those meaningful changes. We know that more is needed, and we trust that more is on its way. Let me end by saying, and before turning it over to Abdulaziz, that from my perspective, after these many years, we in this room and listening remotely, along with our colleagues that we have the privilege to supervise, are amongst the very most privileged of leaders. Our work allows us to clearly see some of our society's biggest failings. But it also positions us not to despair, but rather to come together, to collaborate, and to make generational changes as we build more fair and more just communities, states, and country. Today's challenging times need us to be more focused and energized than ever. I thank the Legal Services Corporation for your 50 years of justice support. I thank my colleagues, and I turn it over to Abdulaziz to provide more specifics on most recent victories. Thank you.
Thank you, Ann and John Keller, for the introduction. As you can tell, I'm not Attorney General Keith Ellison, but I have the pleasure of working for him each and every single day. My name is Abdulaziz Mohammed, and I serve as the Government Affairs and Public Policy Coordinator for Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison. Last summer, our office embarked on a journey to champion debt fairness. What started off as an idea inspired by the Minnesota State Bar Association's Access to Justice Committee's report on Minnesota consumer debt litigation evolved into the Minnesota Debt Fairness Act, landmark legislation that eases the burden of medical debt and consumer debt. A piece of legislation that makes it fairer and easier for Minnesotans to pay back what they borrow, recognizing that the burden of debt is not a personal failing, but a systems problem. A problem with our economic system and a problem with our healthcare financing system and how both those systems interact. After months of hard work, convening community groups and storytellers, engaging with legislators, chairing countless meetings, and navigating 7 committee hearings, the bill passed and was signed into law by Governor Walz last month. This act prohibits medical debt reporting to credit bureaus, ensures no one is denied necessary care due to unpaid debt, establishes fair garnishment levels based on income, among 31 other critical provisions. This achievement not only marks a significant win for Minnesota consumers, but also sets a precedent for similar efforts nationwide. It's encouraging to see the Biden-Harris administration aligning efforts with Minnesota, highlighting the momentum towards equitable medical debt practices. So I am deeply grateful to everyone who helped contribute to this success, especially Katie Drehas, who chaired the Access to Justice Committee, and the partners and advocates in this room who provide support every step of the way. And I'm happy to say we plan to come back with more on medical debt relief next legislative session. With that said, I appreciate your commitment to economic justice, particularly at a time when Minnesotans need it most. And I am proud to introduce the next segment of this panel, a panel discussion on relieving Minnesotans' debt burden, moderated by the president of LSC. Thank you.
I believe in taking a direct route. I'm Ron Flagg, president of LSC. Let's have another round of applause and thanks for John and Abdulaziz. And while I'm in the business of thanking people, we can't put on an event like this without tremendous staff work, both in advance of the event and today. I'd like to thank Jessica Wechter, Bernie Brady, Elena Detralia, Kate Reifenberg, and Carly Satkoviak. Please join me in thanking them for all the great work they've done. And now I'd like to call out our panel to come join me. All right. Thanks to Katie, is not only a masterful drafter of a great report, but she's clearly a tech expert. So if any of you have trouble with your IT, I'm sure she'll be happy to give you advice after the panel is complete. The first question, of course, is why are we talking about debt? I mean, people living in poverty have all sorts of problems: housing, family issues, employment issues, education issues. Why debt? And all of the legal aid attorneys in the audience know that very few clients come into their office with only one problem. But let's talk about debt for a moment. I go around the country talking about the justice gap, and 3/4 of people living in poverty in the country experience one significant civil legal problem a year. Most people don't know that, but almost nobody knows that the largest category of cases which plague people are consumer and debt cases, with over half of low-income Americans facing consumer and debt, significant consumer and debt issues every year. And that's no different here in Minnesota, where over half of the civil filings in 2019 were consumer debt cases. And within the broad category of consumer debt cases, the largest subcategory is medical and dental debt. Let me share some statistics on that. The Kaiser Family Foundation estimates that 100 million Americans, 100 million, live with medical or dental debt. That's about 41% of adults. And low-income individuals are, of course, far more likely to not have savings sufficient to deal with medical emergencies. Let's see here. Half of U.S. adults don't have the cash to cover a $500 medical expense. Think about that. How many medical procedures can you have for $500 or less? Not many. Significantly, and again, those of you who work in legal aid or the courts are familiar with that, with this, most people who face claims of debt are unrepresented. This is true around the country, where over 90% of low-income Americans are unrepresented when they're sued in a debt collection case. And what does that mean as a practical matter? Well, of course, what it means is they default. They don't even get their day in court. Some don't even know that they had a day in court. They're because of the legalese with which debt notices are filled. A lot of people don't know that they've been sued or the scope of what's being asked of them. And without help, it's unsurprising that most debt cases in Minnesota, that's 82% in district court and 54% in conciliation court, end up in default judgment. So when we talk about debt fairness, that's what we're talking about, or what we're talking about is the lack of debt fairness, where over half of the folks who are being sued never get a day in court effectively. And it's these issues which my distinguished colleagues here are going to grapple over the next few minutes. I'm joined today by John Puta, who's a staff attorney with the consumer unit at Smurls, and obviously represents clients in consumer and debt cases every day. Next to John is Kim Miller, the Senior Program Manager of Partnerships and Financial Education with Lutheran Social Service of Minnesota. Kim works directly with clients to provide financial wellness encouragement in a holistic manner. And let me just pause there for a moment because, and again, this is something that our legal aid community is well aware of. We succeed at nothing without collaboration, and that's what brings Kim to her work and with us today. And next to Kim and next to me is Katie Drehas, who's already been mentioned today. She is the Director of Pro Bono and Community Service for the law firm Fredrickson and Byron. And Katie previously served as the Access to Justice Director for the Minnesota State Bar Association, where she played a key role in overseeing the creation of a consumer debt litigation report that we're going to hear more about. Kim, I'd like to start with you. Why is consumer debt particularly problematic for Minnesotans facing economic insecurity, and does debt disproportionately impact any people or groups?
Sure. Thanks again for having me. Yes, consumer debt is a struggle because, who wants one more thing to deal with on a daily basis? And so when you're already struggling, and as you mentioned before, when you lack savings to have emergencies, consumer debt can seem like a lifeline temporarily to help pay the bills or to cover some things, but then it inevitably becomes another monthly obligation, which then can affect cash flow And then you have to start making decisions as to what bills am I going to pay to make up for this new debt. And then when you throw in medical debt or dental debt, where it may not be an issue in the beginning, but then the payments might be not as flexible, or they start getting noisy. And so then people rush and they tend to then take other debt to pay off the medical debt, and they end up paying interest on that. So ultimately, it just becomes multiple things to handle, which can be overwhelming for people. And then they get into a thing called decision fatigue. And so it's a matter of when I'm juggling rent and food and utilities and transportation and insurance, and then you have all these bills, it just becomes something that it can be overwhelming and that people struggle to handle. And especially for people who are facing economic instability or low income, then they tend to be targeted for predatory lending. And so then they get, they don't have access to traditional lines of credit or lower interest. And so then they are faced with getting options of loans that are 100 to 200% interest, and that just traps them into the cycle. And so that can be really difficult. And then ultimately, sometimes when you can't afford the monthly obligations, and they just become unpaid, and they become a form of collections, which then sometimes gets ignored and then doesn't pop up again until, you know, there's a legal issue. And we all know that sometimes it's easier to rebuild credit when you have no credit, but then when you have things on your credit history, it just becomes that much more difficult then to rebuild your credit going forward, and it just creates more and more barriers. And so sometimes you just end up with this cycle of, you know, of just trying to get ahead and then just not finding a way out.
John, Kim just described really a debt trap cycle. How does that resonate with your experience at Smurls, and you know, what kind of problems do you see, and what do you do to help people with those problems?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Ron. First of all, it's an honor to be in part of the program here and share the stage with you two. I think at Smurls, part of our mission is to help our clients to become financially self-sufficient to the extent possible, given their individual circumstances. And some of the things that Kim's talking about with cash flow and the lack of funds to make ends meet certainly resonates with me and with our clients. When you think about, I think most of the audience here knows that in order to be eligible for legal services, you're talking about households that are 125% of federal poverty, maybe up to 200% in some cases, but that's not a lot of wiggle room in your monthly budget. So any kind of emergency situation, a medical event or a car repair that you have to pay for out of pocket, that our clients are going to have to turn to debt to cover that. And then the next month, like Kim said, they're going to have to pay the monthly payment on that debt plus interest, which is going to be more expensive for our clients because the interest rates that they're able to get are usually much higher than probably what you or I are used to. So it's going to add to that cycle of debt and make it more difficult for us to achieve our goal of helping them to become financially self-sufficient.
Katie, as always, it's easier to identify the problems and the challenges, and harder to come up with solutions. But you've done some impressive work in that regard. Last fall, the Minnesota State Bar Association Access to Justice Committee released a comprehensive report on practices and policies relating to debt collection through state courts. And in your role with the bar at the time, you led the project team. What was the impetus for your study, and what were your major findings and recommendations?
Yeah, thank you, Ron. And I was part of a great team that led that, or that worked on that report. Some of them are here today. Dory Rappaport, I see Bridget Jernander, Jay Singleton, and others. And so it was a really team effort. And as you could hear from my fellow panelists, it's a big problem, not just with the legal system. It's how our society is structured, it's wealth inequality, it's our medical system. There's all these pieces. But as the Access to Justice Committee of the Bar Association, we really wanted to focus in on the legal system and how is the legal system handling consumer debt cases as they're coming in. One of the first things that kind of tipped us off to this was the paraprofessional pilot project, which we're going to talk about later. In preparing that project, they were looking at those types of court cases that had the greatest representation disparities, and consumer debt had the highest. 98% of plaintiffs in district court are represented versus 3% of defendants. So it's, basically everyone versus, basically no one. And, but they couldn't find a way that the paraprofessionals could kind of intervene in that process. And so they didn't end up including it, but it was on our radar. We knew that it didn't benefit from any of the other kind of access to justice programs like housing court. Chief Justice Hudson mentioned coordinated case calendars for housing court. We've had specialty courts, but consumer debt hadn't benefited from any of those. And so when we saw other reports come out from Michigan and Utah, and we had the chance to get some funding from the Pew Charitable Trust to really look at this data, we jumped at it. We really wanted to see this. And through that funding, we were able to work with a data analytics firm, January Advisors, who David is here representing them today. And we looked at 10 years worth of consumer debt data, and that was nearly 700,000 cases over the course of 10 years. And we then looked at the data and we talked to people. We talked to attorneys, we talked to litigants, we talked to members of the bench, to court staff, to really get an idea of what that data translated to on the ground. And that really led to the report as it stands. And I'm going to give you, I have notes because I have to keep it short. It's a 60-page report with a lot of recommendations and a lot of findings. So I'm like, okay, stay on topic here, Katie. Our biggest finding was what you mentioned, that 51% of consumer debt or of civil court cases are consumer debt cases. So the majority of cases being heard before our court are consumer debt. And with those tens of thousands of cases every year, very likely this is a lot of people's first interaction with the court system. So, regardless of that, but especially because of that, we want them to make sure they can engage with their case, that they can be heard, that they can be given a fair shot. We want to encourage trust in the justice system, and this is this is an entry point for a lot of people when they're interacting with the courts. We also found that Minnesota actually has lower debt rates than a lot of the country, for a lot of reasons I could go into. But we do have higher litigation rates, and so you're less likely to have debt in Minnesota. But if you do, you're more likely to get sued for it. And we found that those rates disproportionately affected BIPOC Minnesotans more than it did white Minnesotans. And then our default rates that you mentioned in district court and conciliation court are also higher than rates that we see around the country. And that two-tiered district conciliation court system is largely driven by the choice of the plaintiff. Even though conciliation court has lower default rates, there's lower costs for consumers, there's less barriers to participation, we still see a lot of cases that could be heard in conciliation court being pushed to district court. We found that most people sued for debt are above the income guidelines for legal aid, making the need for alternative fee structures and self-help materials really important for those people. We also found that Minnesota isn't keeping up with its neighbors when it comes to bank account protections. One of the team members called the legal aid attorney to we were gathering information, and she said, "Oh, I just talked to somebody this morning who their rent was overdue and they went to go try to pay it and their bank account was frozen and that they don't know what to do." It happens every day. I'm sure that's a call that John gets. And even if that person would have been eligible for an exemption, say they're on public assistance, it still will take weeks for that bank account to become unfrozen. And that can lead to, just a spiral of instability and inability to meet basic needs. And that really happens largely outside of the court process in Minnesota versus other states, which are much more involved in the garnishment process. And so the committee, one of their biggest recommendations was to create those bank account protections. And then, of course, legal aid played a big role in our report, whether it was being on the leadership team, the steering committee, or giving us feedback. They were key partners in that report, and they play a big role in solutions going forward. So whether that's through increased funding and collaboration for programs that can help more people with their consumer debt cases, or developing self-help and educational materials. We have great self-help materials here, and a plug for lawhelpmn.org. If nobody's been there, it's amazing. And we want to just keep working on improving those resources available, and then continuing to bring stories and advocacy. Our legal aid partners are so good at that here. And we really want, the bottom line is we want people to be informed about their rights. We want them to be able to engage with the process and really have a fair shot in these court cases, and in a way that doesn't lead to more poverty and instability.
John, that's a perfect segue into asking you, what can legal aid do in this space, both for the people who qualify financially for your services and the tens of thousands of people who are not able to afford a lawyer but aren't quite poor enough to qualify for your services? What can we do to help those people who today are defaulting at the alarming rates we've been talking about?
First of all, let me make sure this is working. Okay. And thank you to Katie and your group for that awesome report. I think sheds a light on this issue in a really informative way, and like all the points that you already made, I wish I could just repeat those again, because it's like so important, especially the lack of representation, which is where we come in. I think, to me, some of the most exciting ways that we can help is by kind of supplementing the services that SMERLS and other legal services already provide. So, for example, the housing unit, which shout out to the SMERLS housing unit who's here. I was a housing attorney for 10 years, and I guess Justice Hudson and Jesse also, you're included in that. So, we have awesome attorneys in the housing unit, and they spot issues that are, housing adjacent. For example, landlords who are charging fees that aren't allowed under Minnesota law, that's leading to our clients being evicted. And even if when our housing unit, does great work to get the eviction resolved and, get the eviction case expunged. And Minnesota has passed legislation recently to make it even easier for us to get eviction cases expunged, which is good. Now what we're seeing are landlords that are reporting debt from the tenancy on our former housing clients' debt credit reports. So they might call their housing attorney and say, "What happened? I thought you took care of this. Why is this still, preventing me from getting into housing or getting a job in some cases?" And so that's where we can come in as a consumer unit and try to address those debt issues, either by bringing an affirmative case against a debt collector or the landlord if those charges are improper, or working with financial counseling to try to address that and get that resolved so that our clients, again, can find housing, get employment, and become economically self-sufficient.
8 out of 10 debt lawsuits are actually filed against people above the legal aid threshold, obviously suggesting a tremendous need among moderate income Minnesotans. How do the offerings of your organization, Lutheran Social Service of Minnesota, how do you help this population repay their debts, afford basic needs, and regain some economic stability in the face of these debt issues?
Yes, well, I am very happy to talk about it. And financial counseling, we have been a trusted, non-judgmental service for over 30 years in the state of Minnesota, and we are proud to partner with our legal aid friends and the Attorney General's office to be able to meet Minnesotans where they are at. And so a lot of times when people come and see us, it's the first time that they've talked about their money. They get nervous. Money is not something that we talk about. It's like, oh man, we all kind of suffer in silence. But what our counselors are really great at doing is that we can help people get their finances organized for the first time. They may have laid out what is the income coming in, What is our living expenses? What are our options? I myself and other counselors have sat down with people, they've brought in their bags of mail. And sometimes the very first step is to open up everything and to organize. I remember coaching a person over the phone going, okay, that medical bill, let's take a look at the account number. That's a duplicate. We throw that one away, and just allowing them to see, okay, this is the debts, and get everything out in the open so that they are able to see, what's affordable, what might they be able to work on. So number one is we help people get organized. Sometimes in order to get legal services, you need to know what questions to ask and where you are at regarding your debt level and the situation and their rights regarding collections and active unsecured debt. Another area that we help people in is with their unsecured debt, especially with credit cards. We have a program called a debt management plan. Now, we are a nonprofit too. Our counselors are not on commission, but because we are associated with the National Foundation for Credit Counseling, our debt management plan, we have arrangements with national credit card companies where they pay, the client pays us the payment, we pay the creditors on their behalf, all their accounts still stay in their name, and they get full credit reporting of on time, paying their debt down. But the credit card companies are willing to reduce their interest rates to help them get out of debt faster. And so instead of paying 28, 29% interest on their credit card, they may be only paying, ranging between, 1 to 9%, which is a significant difference. So it allows them to pay off the debt and to keep it in good standing and avoid future debt litigation. Now, there comes a trade-off. They have to be willing to close their credit cards and, all the different nuances with that. But for a lot of people, they didn't even realize that was an option. So again, we're here and we can coach people too on how to pay their debt off on their own. Again, when they're dealing with a collector, what are their rights? I just got off the phone with the legal aid office the other day talking about hey, this is an identity theft situation, what are the steps, and we can work together. And so sometimes it's a great partnership because we can help with the what do you do with the debt, and then in collections and the credit reporting is what are their rights and how do we get all the bad stuff off their credit report so they can continue to move forward. So that is a little bit about what we do.
That's great. Katie, our board's been here for 2 days, and we have been constantly impressed by the collaboration, the impactful collaboration that exists among Minnesota's elected officials, the nonprofit sector, the organized bar, our legal aid programs, and others. This is evident in the remarks we just heard from the Minnesota Attorney General's office, and reference has been made to the Minnesota Debt Fairness Act, which was just enacted, which contained reforms including ending the automatic transfer of medical debt to a patient's spouse and banning medical debt from being reported to credit bureaus and establishing automatic income-based wage garnishment level caps. From a policy standpoint, what other changes could be made?
Yeah, we are so lucky and so appreciative of the AG's partnership, and again, just with our legal aid partners, with the courts, everybody who worked on this project has put so much into it. I think the bank account protections that I mentioned earlier were a key recommendation of the ATJ committee's report, and they were introduced at the last legislative session, but ultimately didn't make the final bill. So we're really hoping that we can continue advocacy for that piece. Chief Justice Hudson talked about the great increases in funding for legal aid that we recently achieved, which were amazing, and I hope a good start. So we really want to see those funding increases continue, at the very least, to remain stable, so that they can keep doing the amazing work that they're doing. And then there are a few justice system policies that could help. We have questions. Conciliation court has the higher participation rates and lower costs. Like, how do we steer more cases to conciliation court? How can we create specialty programs or diversion programs that might simultaneously help people and lighten the load for the court system? What are some things that we can do to work together to keep this moving? And the judicial branch has been very open to our report and willing to partner, and we're so grateful for that. And we just really want to keep working together to create meaningful change.
Thanks for that. Now for our final lightning round, 1 minute each. You're going to cure the debt ills of Minnesota with a final thought or a call to action. Kim, lead us off.
I only get 1 minute, huh? Okay. Access to better credit, like secured credit cards to allow people to build traditional credit, not just with credit builder loans, but then allows them to have an emergency line of credit. It's not just with financial education. We should support other systems to help make lives for Minnesotans more affordable. And then also ways to be able to get out of debt when they've gotten to collection so that it doesn't follow them forever. I think judgments is one of them. And so putting a term limit on that to allow them to be able to move forward. And then again, rebuild their credit by having access to more credit building products.
Katie, you've got 1 minute to fix the world.
Okay. Our report was released in October last year. I would love to see us, with this continued collaboration in mind, look at it 1 year later and see what we accomplished, see what our priorities are, kind of, look at that again and see where we can refocus our efforts to keep this moving forward. And I think that would go a good way in, continuing the progress that we've had so far with our partners.
John, as always, when everybody else is said and done, legal aid is left to pick up the pieces.
Thank you. Right. And this might be slightly over a minute, but it'll be worth it because I didn't address your question about the default judgments. And I think to segue from what the report, and what you just said, Katie, we don't really know from the report why there are so many default judgments. So that's one area that another report could look at more specifically. Is it a problem with service? Is it people get served but they don't understand it? Those are the types of questions that would be good to know. But one thing that the report did identify was that at least in those debt buyer cases, there's a significant percentage of those where the documentation that was submitted by the debt buyer didn't even meet the legal standard to entitle them to a judgment under Minnesota law. So that's another opportunity maybe for us to work with the courts to make sure that the laws that are on the books are being enforced, and the Attorney General too, we've worked with on issues like that. So that was my go back. Now my actual final word is just, thank you to LSC, thank you Ron, the board, thank you Jesse and the Smurls board for making it possible for me and the rest of the consumer unit to do this work, and for everybody here for supporting LSC. And I hope you continue. I know you will continue to support LSC.
Please join me in thanking our amazing panel. And now it's my honor and pleasure to introduce Dan Morris, Executive Director of Central Minnesota Legal Services. Take it away, Dan.
Thank you, Ron. Let's give another round of applause for the panel. Thank you, John. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dan Morris, and I'm honored to serve as the Executive Director of Central Minnesota Legal Services. It serves Hennepin County and 20 other counties, mostly towards the north and west of the Twin Cities. The Legal Services Corporation and civil legal aid programs across the state of Minnesota are fortunate to have a bipartisan support both in St. Paul and in Washington, D.C. Especially in today's political climate where we seem to be deeply divided on so many issues, it's really inspiring to know that the cause of equal access to justice is not a Republican nor a Democratic issue, but rather a true American issue. And in this spirit, I'm excited to be able to share with you today a letter from Tom Emmer, Majority Whip for the U.S. House of Representatives. Representative Emmer has represented Minnesota's 6th congressional district since 2015. His district includes many of the counties where CMLS staff and clients live and work. In 2022, Representative Emmer was elected by his colleagues to serve in leadership as the House Majority Whip. He also sits on the House Committee on Financial Services, and previously he was the vice chair of Congressional Access to Legal Aid Caucus before stepping down because of his whip duties. Prior to his election in Congress, Representative Emmer served in the Minnesota House of Representatives, hosted a popular radio show on Twin Cities News Talk, AM 1130, and worked as a private practice attorney. He is a staunch supporter of legal aid and one of LSC's champions in the House. While Representative Emmer couldn't be with us in person here today, Congress is in session after all, he did want to share his own words about what this cause means to him, and so it's truly my privilege to now read his letter. Hello, everyone. I want to extend a special thank you to our chairman, John Leaving, and President Ron Flagg for inviting me to speak with you today during our Access to Justice Forum. While I'm disappointed that I can't be with you in person, I want to take a moment to thank you all for the work that you do to ensure the promises of justice enshrined in the Constitution are afforded to the millions of Americans in need. You may know I am an attorney. Like you, I believe in the importance of access to justice and the rule of law because every American deserves representation. The fight for basic legal assistance is not a Republican issue or a Democrat issue. It's an American issue. The Legal Services Corporation champions this cause. There is still, and always will be, more work to be done to address the justice gap in the United States, but we couldn't do it without organizations like the Legal Services Corporation. Together with my colleagues in Congress, we remain committed to working to secure the resources that you need to support accessibility to legal justice resources. Thank you for inviting me to join you all today, and thank you for committing yourselves to the tremendous task of ensuring that low-income Minnesotans and all Americans can receive the critical legal services promised to them in the United States Constitution. Thank you, Tom Emmer, Congressman, Minnesota's 6th Congressional District, House Majority Whip.
Senator Klobuchar has represented the state of Minnesota in the U.S. Senate since 2007, and she's the first woman elected as a U.S. Senator from the state. Yay. Senator Klobuchar has been a consistent advocate for civil legal aid and has co-signed the annual bipartisan LSC appropriation support letter that calls for the robust funding of federal legal aid. She's also the chairwoman of the Senate Rules Committee, where she's worked to ensure fairness, transparency, and efficiency in government, and also serves as the chairwoman of the Judiciary Subcommittee on Competition Policy, Antitrust, and Consumer Rights. Before her election, she headed the largest prosecutor's office in Minnesota for 8 years. If she were here, I would also tell her that my mother is like her #1 fan in the world. She talks about her all the time, and she reads and watches everything she does. So on behalf of LSC's Board of Directors and my mother, I wanted to thank Senator Klobuchar for her support of civil legal aid. And please enjoy these remarks.
Hello to all my friends at the Legal Services Corporation. I sure wish I could be there with you in person, but there's just a few things keeping us busy in Washington right now. Congratulations on 50 years of protecting the promise of justice for all. You've come a long way since your founding, and I'll note that it was a Minnesotan, my friend and mentor, Walter Mondale, who we miss so much, who led the legislation to create LSC when he was in the Senate. Yours is a story of dedication, resilience, and providing hope for those who need it most. It's a story written by generations of lawyers, paralegals, legal aid organizations, and volunteers. Over the last half century, LSC-funded civil legal aid programs have made a difference to countless Americans, and you don't have to look further than Minnesota for proof. In our state, just last year, recipients of LSC funding provided assistance to over 50,000 people, including almost 1,000 vets, 3,000 seniors, and 5,000 domestic violence victims. But we all know that your work isn't just about the numbers. It's about our moms and dads, sons and daughters, friends and neighbors. It's about the Minnesota family who lost all of their documents in a flood, but were able to get the replacements they needed thanks to you. It's about the Minnesota mom who was able to fill out a legal aid application form and advice on obtaining an order of protection against her abusive spouse when a legal aid office's justice bus happened to be in the grocery store parking lot when she was out shopping with her kids. And it's about the veteran who, after suffering a heart attack, needed to apply for Social Security disability benefits. He had exhausted his savings while waiting for his disability appeal hearing, but after finding a legal aid lawyer, he was able to secure his monthly benefits, financial security, and some much needed peace of mind. I know these people because they call our office all the time, and so often we're able to refer them to lawyers that can help. Your results speak for themselves. America is better because of you. Unfortunately, as you know too well, the nationwide need for civil legal aid continues to grow. As your own Justice Gap report makes clear, 92% of low-income Americans facing civil legal issues received inadequate or no legal assistance, and half of those who are eligible and reach out to LSC grantees are turned away only because of lack of resources. In other words, Americans are being denied justice, not because of the facts of their case or because of the law, but solely because they can't afford a lawyer. That's not right, it's not fair, and it shouldn't happen in our country. You're all doing your part to close the justice gap. It's on Congress to do ours. That's why I'm focused on making sure LSC and the legal aid offices that rely on the resources have the funding needed to ensure Americans from every zip code can get the assistance they need when they need it. Thank you all for working to uphold the promise so central to who we are as a nation that we had it etched in the marble of the Supreme Court: equal justice under law. Your work brings us closer to that American ideal. Keep fighting the good fight. That's what Mondale called it, the good fight. And happy 50th anniversary. And here's to the next 50 years. Thanks, everyone.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dory Rappaport. I'm the Executive Director at Justice North. And I just have to say, you have heard a lot about the justice gap. So you heard it from Senator Klobuchar. You heard it from LSC's board chair. You heard about it from LSC's president. You heard about it from our Chief Justice. And I have to say, the Chief Justice's analogy about the US Bank Stadium, that was a new one. And wow, like that, 12 lawyers to serve the US Bank Stadium. I mean, that's the justice gap in Minnesota. Ooh, we lost lights.
We're punctuating the concept of.
I hit a button. I'm so sorry. Oh, wow. Thanks, Jessica. You're the best. All right. So I'm going to give you another justice gap statistic. Americans experience 150 million to 250 million new civil justice problems each year, putting their housing, employment, healthcare, education, and families more at risk. LSC's 2022 Justice Gap study found that more than 9 out of 10 cases, low-income Americans don't receive adequate legal help for their civil legal problems because, as you know, legal aid programs are forced to turn away half of the eligible applicants who make it to their doors. One conclusion is the reality that there aren't enough affordable, accessible lawyers to go around. The other is that lawyers are not the entirety of the solution. There's a growing movement to rethink who can provide legal services, especially in certain settings like family and housing matters. 9 states and counting, including our wonderful state of Minnesota, permit allied legal professionals, or yes, paraprofessionals, to practice either independently or with attorney supervision. And as of February 2024, 5 states have community-based justice workers, all with varied training requirements, scope of service, and regulatory oversight. As Chief Justice Hudson stated, in the fall of 2020, our Minnesota Supreme Court inaugurated a legal paraprofessional pilot program which runs through August. The pilot project permits legal paraprofessionals under the supervision of a Minnesota licensed attorney to provide legal advice and, in some cases, represent clients in court. Additionally, my colleagues from Anishinaabe Legal Services have adopted another promising innovation, community justice workers, that has shown tangible success in rural and remote areas where lawyers are sparse and tribal communities face compounding barriers to accessing justice, like cultural and language differences. You'll hear from them momentarily. So this brings us to our panel discussion. As Minnesota's legal professional program pilot is under consideration by our Supreme Court to be a permanent model in Minnesota, we want to unpack those lessons learned to inform not only the court's decision, but also guide other states that may want to undertake similar experiments that look beyond lawyers to close the justice gap. So it's my pleasure to introduce you to our esteemed panel. First, we have Cody Nelson. Cody is the Executive Director at Anishinaabe Legal Services, which provides legal assistance to historically underserved people living on or near Leech Lake, Red Lake, and White Earth tribal lands to protect legal rights and tribal sovereignty. Cody has been with Anishinaabe since graduating from St. Thomas Law School in 2006. Jenna Finn is a paralegal and community justice worker with Anishinaabe Legal Services. She co-chairs Anishinabe's Housing Committee and serves as an elected member of the Prescott Local Indian Council for the Leech Lake Reservation. Born and raised in northern Minnesota, Jenna and her family make their home in Cass Lake. She's been with Anishinaabe for 2 years. Jim Long is an attorney at Maslin Firm in Minneapolis and previously was at the old Briggs & Morgan firm, where he was in charge of their pro bono program for many years. Jim is an appointed member of both the Minnesota Supreme Court's Legal Services Advisory Committee, as well as the Minnesota Supreme Court's Standing Committee for the Legal Paraprofessional Pilot Project. He also teaches antitrust law as an adjunct at the University of Minnesota Law School. And finally, my colleague, Rachel Albertson, Innovation Manager at Justice North. In her nearly 20 years on staff, Rachel has worn many hats to ensure equal access to justice in rural Minnesota. Rachel is a certified paralegal and a participant in the state's Legal Paraprofessional Project. So let's get started and hear from our panel. Rachel and Jenna, I often hear a parallel drawn between the diversity of healthcare professionals by the way we could be providing legal services. So highlighting how it's not just doctors, but also nurse practitioners, certified nurses assistants, community health aides, specialists, generalists. So could you, given this sort of comparison, talk to us about and help us understand your roles as community justice worker and a paraprofessional? So let's start with Jenna. Try again. The green.
Testing.
There you go.
Okay. So my role as community justice worker has been so many things since I started. I am fairly new, and but I am learning, and it's basically my community members. I am a community member. I grew up in Leech Lake. And it's very easy to see what they need, and it's easy for them to tell me, compared to a lawyer, that the help that they need, and just, yeah.
So you can really relate to them. Do you find that you being part of their community makes you more accessible to them?
Oh yeah. Yeah, it's I see every day what most of them go through, and it's not, a lot of them need help, and it's not necessarily from a lawyer. It's just simple things like referrals to resources, just finding the help that they need. We help a lot with people that are going through child protection cases, and there's so many mothers and fathers that want to do better, but just don't have the means to, they're struggling with so many other things like addiction, little to no income, just so many things that they need help with, and that really could help them to be in a better place.
Thank you so much. Rachel, do you want to talk about being a paraprofessional?
Sure. Thanks, Dory. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Sorry. Maybe it was my voice. Sorry. Okay, as Dory said, I have had many roles over the past 20 years and kind of have seen the progression, which is very exciting. The momentum recently towards access to justice is exciting, and it's an exciting time to be a paralegal. My current role doesn't necessarily allow me to be the traditional paralegal, therefore not the traditional paraprofessional. But we are lucky enough at Justice North to have 5 of those on our team. My experience is mostly in outreach. And so whether I am taking the Justice Bus somewhere or just going to a rural location and meeting people, the fact that I can, in certain circumstances, actually meet people, do the application, look at the crumpled documents that they're holding, and give them advice all in one time frame, right? Not the callbacks, not the connection issues. Has been a real, it's been a great experience because it's a great client experience, right? And so before having to meet them, get their documents, and then refer it to somebody else when it's an issue that I would be able to handle as a Minnesota paraprofessional, has just kind of made the process so much better for really both sides. More efficient for legal aid side, better client service. And beyond me and my personal experiences at Justice North, we've seen the benefits by paraprofessionals appearing at hearings on their own family cases, right? That then provided more resources for attorneys to take the cases that are not allowed under the paraprofessional program. We've also had paraprofessionals appear in virtual housing court calendars where they show up. And so over the course, I would just say in the last year, I mean, hundreds of cases in just our organization have been handled by paraprofessionals, which then you can just imagine how much more, how much that allows attorneys to take more cases and how much more efficient that is. So I'm probably talking too long, and I'm sorry, I don't see clock or minutes, and I'm just gonna ramble. So I'll wrap that up. Thanks.
Well, and Rachel, that was a great comparison. I mean, what I'm hearing is paraprofessionals are able to free up the time of lawyers the way like nurse practitioners are able to free up the time of doctors. And so I'm going to pivot to Cody now. And Cody, so an underlying premise to this conversation is that maybe lawyers aren't always the necessary and ideal helpers, and actually Access to Justice scholar Rebecca Sandifer has written that across several common problems, non-lawyer advocates and unrepresented lay people have been observed to perform as well or better than lawyers. So Cody, based on your experience at Anishinaabe with community justice workers, what do you think?
Yes, absolutely. I would agree with that. So community justice workers, for a long time we called them lay advocates, but I'm just going to call them community justice workers, or CJWs, for the purpose of today's panel. They've been a critical component of our service delivery model since I first started there in 2006. I've been fortunate to work alongside many talented CJWs who have mentored me as an attorney, collaborated with me on tricky cases, and delivered the highest quality of legal assistance to our community members. So I just have a couple examples. One is Mary Smith. Her work centered around serving elders throughout our tribal communities. Mary worked for our program for nearly 40 years. Elders didn't want to get help from our program attorneys. They wanted to get help from Mary. They would just walk in and say, hey, I want to talk with Mary. The relationships she built and the reputation among the senior populations were truly second to none. And then there was Mary Ringhan. She was our Red Lake Reservation community justice worker. She was born and grew up on the Red Lake Nation in Panema and had resided there most of her life. She worked for us for over 4 years, delivering a wide range of high-quality legal services throughout Red Lake. She was so effective that she was recruited by the Red Lake Nation to become one of their judges, and she has been on the bench now for over 10 years, many of which serving as Chief Justice. Our attorneys and she did CJWs actually often appear before her in the Red Lake Nation Tribal Court. And then I'll talk a little bit, just to finish, as another example is Rita Osman. She's our, currently she's our lead CJW, and she's worked for us for about a decade now. She's focused on Social Security disability advocacy and representation, and she is licensed with the Social Security Administration as a non-attorney representative. Her tireless advocacy and commitment to her clients is legendary throughout our communities. And so an example of just the effectiveness of her work is we have contracts in place with the Minnesota Department of Human Services where if we take on a case for Social Security disability for a low-income tribal member and we prevail in that matter, we will receive some payment from the state for taking that case and getting them approved for benefits. Rita is so effective that she raised over $100,000 for our program last year alone just because of the volume of the cases she takes and how many of these she's prevailed for her clients on. So it's a big part of our practice, and she trains in our lawyers, and sometimes she gets frustrated because they can't often keep up with her. And so I have other examples more than that, but you kind of get the picture. But in 18 years with the program, I've seen CJW's quality of work meet or exceed attorney coworkers. And we're really excited to have 2 new CJWs starting with us this year, including Jenna, who's doing just a fantastic job with the program. So.
Okay, Cody, those were incredible examples that make the point that sometimes lawyers are not the answer and not who is preferred by communities that we're trying to reach. They have that trusting relationship and it's unmatched. Jenna, can you talk to us a little bit about what your training and your mentorship has looked like as you've taken on this community justice worker role?
Yeah, sure. I am currently enrolled in courses, Alaska Pacific University, and just self-paced courses, and that's going well. On top of that, I've done so many trainings, expungement trainings, just you name it, civil legal aid issue trainings. And I've also worked with Val Field. She's our litigation director for Anishinaabe Legal Services. And she's amazing, as well as Sherry. She's our administration director, and she's just an overall great person. And she knows the community as well and has been a really good role model to show me the way. And yeah, it's been good.
It sounds like an incredible support system. Jim, we're going to pivot to you. So in January 2024, the standing committee on which you serve recommended to the Supreme Court that they make the pilot program permanent. What contributed to this recommendation?
So obviously this was a pilot, and throughout the 3.5 years of the standing committee, we were focused both on getting it up and running and administering it, but also knew that we would have to make recommendations at the end, and so we're focused on that. And in the order adopting the pilot rule, Chief Justice Gilday really explained what we were piloting. And what she wrote was that the purpose of the pilot was to test the assumptions that the need for civil legal aid, particularly in the areas of family law and landlord-tenant disputes, is great, and that legal paraprofessionals can contribute to the needs of Minnesota citizens in these areas. And so that's what we were focused on. And to not bury the lead, clearly what we found was that yes, not only were the needs great, but this program really could provide access to justice to those that otherwise would not get it. And so throughout the program, we were focused on different criteria, but we were looking at both numbers and obviously we were looking at quality. And so from terms of numbers, what I can give you is that we worked through the judicial branch, looking at MnSIS data and other data. At the end of the 3 years of the program, or at the end of the 3 years when we issued our report, through MnSIS, just talking about closed cases handled by paraprofessionals. There were 259 cases, but that was only the tip of the iceberg because we also had self-reported closed cases from both the paraprofessionals and also from organizations such as Justice North and the other legal aid societies. And there we had 2,312 closed self-reported cases. And many of those came through SMERLS, through Justice North, Legal Assistance of Olmsted County, and others. And also the geographic scope of this program, just through the MNCES data, 40 of the 87 Minnesota judicial districts had closed cases handled by paraprofessionals. So this was really provided access to a large geographic area. And then on quality, we very early in the program put together a complaint process for clients and others who had touched the work by the paraprofessional. It was communicated to the clients in the engagement letters. It was on the judicial branch website. It was very accessible. And for the close to 2,600 closed cases, we had 0 complaints. And that really, for us, was a big deal. Beyond that, throughout the program every year, we did surveys. And I have to say that the folks at the judicial branch that were great support, spent untold hours on getting these surveys out to the paraprofessionals themselves, to the clients, to the judicial officers, and to the supervising attorneys. And so every year in the fall, we had surveys. And if you want to get in depth in this, go to the judicial branch website where you'll see our report. But just to give you a few numbers, of the responding supervising attorneys, 85% reported being very satisfied with the program. Over 90% reported that they wish to continue in their role, and all were in favor of making the program permanent. Of the responding paraprofessionals, all were satisfied, and most of them very satisfied. All were in favor of making it permanent, and all indicated they stay with the program. And with respect to the clients, of the 17 respondents in our last survey, 15 of 17 of them were satisfied or very satisfied, and the same number recommended that the program be made permanent. And so from that, we really had great statistics. And the last thing I want to say is, for me, what brought home the success of this program, frankly, was the efforts of folks like Justice North and SMERLS and all the legal aid societies that really took this to heart and really used it in a way that clearly expanded great access to justice. And Dora, you can talk about it, or Rachel, you can talk about it. But this really, but for the efforts of you folks, this might not have been viewed as the success that clearly it is, and provides a way for folks outside of legal aid now to grab onto this project and go forward.
Thank you, Jim. And I'm sure as people have just listened to what you had to say, listen to that feedback. Like, it sounds incredible. And so I'm going to ask you and Rachel now to talk about if other states are looking to implement something similar, what advice do you have for them? And maybe in your answer, also bring up if there's any sort of what you've heard as like skeptics concerns, because that would really help people move forward with the same model. So Jim, Rachel, whoever wants to go first.
You want me to start? All right. So I think first to emphasize that this is another tool in the tool belt for access to justice. And if you start out explaining that's really the purpose of this, I think it takes care of some of the skepticism. And obviously one of the skepticism is this taking work away from lawyers? And throughout all of this, we've tried to stress that paraprofessionals under this setup are not in competition with lawyers. And this is not a situation where a client who's going to go to a paraprofessional under this program has the choice between a paraprofessional and a lawyer. In almost all instances, the client has a choice between a paraprofessional and no representation whatsoever. And all of us that have done any amount of pro bono work or in this area know that having clients pro se, I don't have to tell this to the judges in the audience, is just such a difficult position for them to be in, and to have quality representation through paraprofessionals really, really makes a difference. But it is not competition with the lawyers. And particularly in our setup, where we have the supervising attorney who signs on with the paraprofessional, has the duties to supervise. This is underneath the Minnesota Supervised Practice Rules. And so there really is no competition. And it also is, these folks are very, very qualified. But for people that don't have that sense, you have the backstop of supervising attorneys who ensure that a paraprofessional is not taking a task that the supervising attorney doesn't think they're ready for. And then the last thing I'd say is don't set the expectations up too high. I mean, it took us a while to get rolling on this. Having COVID did not help much and to roll this out. But these programs take some amount of time, and you look to see on a smaller sample size, and then you push from it. I mean, we only initially had certain aspects of housing court and family court. As you'll hear at the end, we have recommended some expansions, but don't have too high expectations, and just focus on what the real purpose is.
Thanks, Jim. Rachel?
Try to be quick here, but everything Jim said. And so there's obviously education requirements or experience or a combination of both. Paraprofessionals aren't just anyone who wants to be a legal paraprofessional. So you have to be qualified and under supervision of an attorney. The education requirements for an associate's paralegal degree or bachelor degree, you really learn a lot about ethics and ethical rules, which includes, the traditional legal advice, how you're protecting attorneys' licenses. No one's going above and beyond that. Basically, at the end of the day, the people who are paraprofessionals in Minnesota really understand and have no intention of giving bad advice. And so I think there's a lot of protections beyond for that, basically, for the training and the paraprofessionals. So I guess the other thing I would say is just look at the data, not only Minnesota's reports of the pilot project, but around the country. And then because we're mostly all legal professionals in this room, I would encourage anyone who is looking to start a program like this to just go beyond that. And I appreciate all the voices and all the people who have opinions about this, and it's very important for the legal community to have those heard. It's also really important to get feedback and information about people and people who can't afford to hire a private attorney and people who get turned away from legal aid because we don't have resources, and people who don't know what to do when they're served with court papers, and people who have had their children, lost custody because they didn't respond to paperwork. And just don't forget about hearing their voices.
So true, Rachel. And, that's a good segue back to you, Cody, to talk about the voice of the communities receiving services from community justice workers. So, Cody, based on your experience with community justice workers at Anishinaabe, what difference does this make for them? And how would you say this might be better justice?
Oh, thanks, Dory. Yeah, I think it makes a huge difference. And, I think this difference is reflected in the licensing process used by our area tribal courts. So our tribes are inherently government entities, and so tribes get to decide who gets to practice before their courts. And our tribal courts permit the license of non-attorney advocates if they meet specific criteria, which varies from tribe to tribe. And that's how, for instance, as I discussed earlier, our Red Lake CJW became a judge on their tribal court. She had been licensed and representing clients for Anishinaabe Legal Services before their court for several years. They saw what a great job she was making and a difference she was making for their relatives. And so they appointed her to the bench. Tribes have long recognized that it's important to incorporate more than just attorneys to try to ensure justice in their communities. And so we're able to get our CJWs licensed before the tribal courts, and we try to get them licensed to as many of the tribal courts as possible within our area. And since most of our courtroom advocacy is before the tribal courts, it helps us to significantly enhance our program services. But zooming back a bit though, a key aspect of community justice workers is finding individuals with a significant connection to the community to be served. So often our CJWs are born and raised and have spent most of their lives in the communities within our service area. These CJWs understand the community needs, challenges, barriers, and strengths far better than those who come from the outside. And the reality is, as much as we want to hire attorneys who are from our service area, this doesn't happen nearly as often as we'd like. Our service area is hyper-rural, and there is a significant lack of professional service workers on the whole. Doctors, lawyers, CPAs. When we hire for an attorney position, half the time they don't have a connection to our area, and oftentimes our applicants come from outstate. So we do a lot of in-house training to build understanding of cultural history, tradition, and cultural competency, but that training can never come close to reaching the understanding that comes from someone within the community. And in fact, often our CJWs informally do a lot of training and mentoring with our attorneys in those areas, which is really helpful. And a number of our community members prefer to get help from local community member CJWs as opposed to our attorneys. I mean, it's getting help from one of their own as opposed to from an outsider. I found that as long as the services are delivered competently and compassionately, clients often tell our CJWs they'd prefer to work with them than our attorneys. And then finally, CJWs are indispensable in helping us to forge and maintain collaborative relationships with partners and stakeholders throughout our tribal communities. Many CJWs have personal relationships and contacts coming in that we leverage to better serve clients. And they're also the ones who are most frequently out in the community at events and other gatherings, meeting with the public and other agency representatives, spreading awareness of our program and services. So that's a crucial component of our programming, and nobody is better equipped to lead those efforts than CJWs.
Thanks, Cody. So to close out our conversation today, I'd like to ask everyone on the panel to share a call to action. So what's one thing we can do to make a material difference in the justice gap? Who wants to start? Jim wants to start. Okay.
Mine is obvious. Assuming that at least some of the recommendations of the standing committee are adopted by the Supreme Court and this becomes a permanent program, I ask all of you who are in a position to access this program to take another look at it. Through 3 years, we know it works. The pilot has shown that it works. And I think there's a great deal of opportunity to really expand the scope of this. We have made recommendations that, to the extent they're accepted, would add areas of practice to paraprofessionals. And we've also recommended the name now be legal practitioner. And those range from debt representation and conciliation court or in district court up to $15,000, based in large part upon the MSBA's wonderful report that you've all heard about. Criminal expungement, certain limited areas and license revocation in Office of Administrative Hearings, and other areas. Also, for those of you in Minneapolis, we have recommended that the 4th Judicial District Housing Court be included for paraprofessionals, which I think for some of you pro bono coordinators can give you some more access to this program. But I really ask for you, those of you that are interested in another tool to address access to justice, please read our report, evaluate it. You know where to find me. I'm easy on the internet to find at Maslin.com. Call up any of us on the standing committee and we can talk to you about this.
Thanks, Jim. Let's go to Cody. All good.
Well, I would just say my call to action or understanding is that this idea is it's not a new concept. It's been going on in tribal communities since court systems first developed there. Even outside of tribal communities, the federal government has permitted non-attorneys to represent client and practice law in various administrative matters for over 60 years now. If the CJW model was not successful, if it was not helpful, it would not be continuing on as long as it has. And when over 90% of people are not able to access an attorney, we need to look at new ways to do things. And this is a promising model. It's not a magic bullet. It's not going to solve the problem completely on its own, but it's an important part of the solution, in my opinion.
Agreed. Thanks so much for that, Cody. Jenna?
My call to action would be to just learn more about it. Just maybe visit some communities, see how much it is working, attend some outreach events that we attend, and we kind of speak with the community members on the issues they're having, and you really get a sense of what is going on and how many people need help. So yeah, just getting out there and seeing for yourself.
Thank you, Jenna. Rachel?
All of the above. My call to action is access to justice is important to everyone in this room, or you wouldn't be here, I'm guessing. We have heard a lot about wonderful innovations and programs happening in Minnesota today that really are working towards providing actual equal access to justice. And we've also heard the other side of the statistics that show we're absolutely not there, nowhere close. So my call to action is just get involved. We're not going to pro bono our way out of this if you're an attorney in this room, but don't stop, right? If you're interested in the paraprofessional project, read the report. If you're interested in tribal court, read their rules. Let's learn some lessons from them. They've been doing this for a long time, and it's been working there. And we can also learn things from other business aspects, right? We don't have to keep this in just the legal space, which is kind of back to the original reference of the medical community. They do not have brain surgeons putting Band-Aids on people in urgent care, right? I mean, and there's a reason for that. And so we're getting closer with this paraprofessional project, and I think we can do more. So whatever space that is for you, I just hope you're an advocate in that area.
Let's give this panel a big round of applause. All right. Thanks, and stay tuned for the next panel.
This is your opportunity to get up and take a 10-second stretch break while we do our set change. 10-second stretch break.
I'll tune it out. The mute button is your power button. Okay. Green, you're good to go.
Again, thank you, Dory, and panelists Jenna, Jim, Cody, and Rachel for that really great discussion, conversation about looking beyond lawyers to increase access to justice. My name is Lori Mikva. I'm a member of the LSC board, and it's really my honor to introduce our next panel. In keeping with the theme of looking beyond, we're going to look beyond public interest lawyers. Legal aid lawyers alone cannot close the justice gap. For example, hundreds of leaders from business, academia, and local government sign letters to Congress each year in support of federal funding for civil legal services. It was referenced earlier. These letters are really essential to maintaining LSC funding. This past year, almost 150 corporate counsel signed such a letter, including 8 companies from Minnesota: Allianz, U.S. Bank Corp, Medtronic, Best Buy, Mayo Clinic, 3M, CHS Inc., and Carlink. Our partners in the business community are some of the best, most influential and effective actors in expanding access to justice, including the 3 on stage with me today. So I'd like to introduce them. Jim Chosey, Senior Executive Vice President and General Counsel of U.S. Bank Corp., parent company of U.S. Bank. Among his extensive board and community activities, he serves on the boards of the Equal Justice Works and Minnesota Legal Aid. He's chair of the Corporate Advisory Council for the National Legal Aid and Defender Association. Ivan Fong, former chairman and that's a...
Congratulations.
I got you here. Ivan is Executive Vice President, General Counsel, and Secretary of Medtronic. He's also a member of the LSC's Leader Council. He's held roles in the Justice Department, the Department of Homeland Security, has served as General Counsel at 3 public companies, former chair of the board of the Equal Justice Works. On a more personal note, he started out his legal career as a law clerk to my father, Judge Abner Mikva, on the D.C. Court of Appeals, before he went on to clerk for Supreme Court Justice Sandra Day O'Connor. Now, what do we do with the... Sorry, guys. This is a foolproof system. Except when I lose a card.
I can cover it.
Okay.
My name is Tim Flynn. I'm delighted to be here today. I'm retired chairman and CEO of KPMG. I serve a number of corporate boards since I retired in 2012. Born in Minneapolis, went to St. Thomas, and delighted to be here with all of you today.
He's done really so many great things. I had a really long card on him. My word, he served on many, many boards. So I first want to ask all of you to share a defining moment with us. You're all here at an LSC event about increasing access to justice. This is obviously important to you. Can you tell us how and why this value took root in your lives? I'll start with you, Jim.
Yeah, thank you. I'm not sure I have one singular defining moment or origin story, no lightning strike of enlightenment, but let me just share a couple things. The first of which is I love and have always loved American history, government, politics, current events, things like that. Studied political science as an undergrad, and I've just always been interested in the rule of law as one of the founding principles of our country and been inspired by this ideal of equal justice under law. A big influence on me and my values is actually a place, which is my hometown of Madison, Wisconsin, a very progressive city, university town, state capital, a place that instilled civic pride and a strong sense of service and stewardship. Then I became a lawyer, and I've just always felt very privileged to be a member of the legal profession and am proud of my title as a lawyer, and I try to take that role very seriously. I believe strongly the law is indeed a profession. It's not a trade, it's not a business, but it's a profession. There's a terrific definition of a profession that goes back over 100 years. Justice Brandeis came up with it, and he described one of the distinguishing characteristics of a profession as an occupation that's pursued largely for the benefit of others and not merely for one's self. So it's a higher calling and it comes with great responsibility. And I think that we lawyers, as legal professionals, have a responsibility to this system and to those that it should be serving, and a responsibility to access and to equal justice. And unfortunately, today, as we all know, the system's just not working as well as it should be. It's not working fairly and equally for everyone. And we do not have equal justice under law as yet, though we aspire to it. And there are any number of statistics. I've heard several of them cited today, including the LSC's own Justice Gap report, showing that 92% of Americans don't have adequate assistance in their substantial legal problems. And that statistic I just can't get over every time I hear it, 92%. Similarly, the World Justice Project recently ranked the US only 115th out of 142 countries in access and affordability of civil justice. And then right here at home, Mid-Minnesota Legal Aid, an organization I'm passionate about, involved with, they turn away over half of their potential clients for lack of resources. So for me, these kinds of statistics are just unacceptable, really, and I think they should be a source of some shame, actually, for the legal profession. And without equal justice, to me, it's not just the system, but it's the government itself that can't function properly. And this corollary was actually noted by our own Senator Walter Mondale. Senator Klobuchar noted this, that he was involved in sponsoring the original legislation for the LSC way back in 1971. And he said, with his typical plain eloquence, if the poor and the powerless do not have free access to our legal system, then government by law itself is a failure. So I think I will pause there, but those are just some thoughts as I think about the value of equal justice.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Lori, and thank you to the Legal Services Corporation for inviting us to this panel. It's such an important topic for us to be talking about, and such great friends in the audience, John Levy and Ron Flack and Jesse Nicholson. I too don't have a defining moment. I do think back to when I was a child, when I was raised. My parents came to the United States as immigrants, as refugees, and so I grew up knowing that there is no guarantee, and this country has been so good to my family that it only behooves me to want to give back. I grew up in the 60s and 70s when the heroes in my family were Bobby Kennedy and Martin Luther King Jr. And so phrases like life's most urgent question is, what are you doing for others? And Marian Wright Edelman's quote, service is the rent we pay for being. It is the very purpose of life, not something you do in your spare time. So that's how I was raised. And Lori, I appreciate your allusion to my clerkship with Judge Abner Mikva, from whom I learned a great verse in Scripture, Micah 6:8, do justice is one of the 3 commands. So it's just something I was born with and into throughout school, whether law school or college. I did volunteer works, community service work. As a lawyer in a law firm, I did a ton of pro bono work. I did death penalty cases. I did child custody, adoption cases. I did work for nonprofits. I became the vice chair of the firm's pro bono committee. Then in the government, I continued to advocate for government lawyers doing pro bono services. I'm particularly proud that I have this little certificate from Attorney General Janet Reno. I worked on the pro bono policy that allowed Department of Justice lawyers to do pro bono work, and so that was a nice recognition. And then we'll talk more, but in-house, I've become an advocate for in-house lawyers doing pro bono work, and so have done a fair amount of work here in town, in Minnesota, but also really want to support and encourage other lawyers. As Jim said, it really is a professional responsibility. Practicing law is a privilege. We have a license from the state, and in exchange for this monopoly, we have an obligation to provide services to those who cannot afford them. And I really tell folks, not only is the need great, we all know the statistics, the 92%, but it's rewarding. For me, the defining moments are those cases that I worked on where you're serving a client, and the client is just so grateful to have a lawyer help them with their particular legal problem and crisis. And I think back, those were the moments that I said to myself, this is why I became a lawyer, right? To have those moments when you have a really grateful client and get to work on something interesting and fun, learn new skills. It's great bonding because I work with paralegals and others in the law firm and in the legal department that I otherwise might not have that opportunity. So I too will pause. I could go on at great length.
Thank you, Ivan. Would you share that memo with the state attorney generals around the country?
Of course.
Tim, I did find it. Tell us about your moment or moments.
Well, first of all, it's really great to be here. And John, who known a long time, and my friend Paul Snyder, has been very much involved with this organization for a very long time, invited me to be here today. I would say my aha moment with this is being on this panel and preparing for it. I have had the privilege of leading a large international accounting firm, sitting on some very prestigious corporate boards. And this topic, in all the social responsibility, all the activities that we do such great jobs in our community around, and these organizations do fantastic work. This is a topic that hasn't risen to the top of kind of the ideas, the energy, etc. I did a bit of research to see how my corporate boards looked at this, and I found one Walmart Corporation has invested $100 million over the next 5 years on social justice and had 4 key areas. It was education, finance, health, and criminal justice. And I was delighted to see that, but I hadn't heard much about that. So I'm going to go back and do some investigation on that and understand it better. I've had the resources, my family has, to solve issues and take care of things, and we haven't personally experienced some of the things we've heard about today. And some of the statistics and the numbers are really amazing and enlightening. And as I prepared for this over the last couple of weeks, I talked to a number of people about the question you asked me. And have you ever experienced that in your life? And these are friends that I've socialized with and have known. And there was a woman who's a lawyer. We're out for dinner, my wife and I and Susan, her husband. And I said, I'm on this panel, and I'm just curious, do you have any ideas that I could say in this question? Because I haven't had personal experience. She kind of looked at me, and she said, well, I knew a woman who was in an abusive relationship. She had 2 children, didn't have any financial resources. She kept going down to the courthouse and to the city hall to file applications for restraining orders and try and work through the process of divorce, all those things. And I looked around, and there were all kinds of other mothers, just like me. I was one of those moms. And she talked about that experience in her life through that, and now she practices law and giving back in that process. So those were a couple of aha moments that I know much more about what you all have done and appreciate it for it and how it's impacted people's lives that I know personally.
Well, I think you sell yourself short, but okay. Jim, I want to talk to you about the letter I referenced moments ago. As chair of the Corporate Advisory Council, you were the chief organizer of the signature gathering effort. Tell us why it's important for business leaders to voice support for legal aid, and what did you say to your fellow business executives to get them to sign on?
Yeah, thank you. So it's interesting. It's not always intuitive to people why businesses, and particularly large corporations like mine, should be involved with civil legal aid and support it. Just as one example, we at US Bank have a very long and deep and strong relationship with Mid-Minnesota Legal Aid right here in the Twin Cities, and people often ask me that, how did that come to be? And for me, the answer is pretty simple. Actually, it's about community. If you think about it, the business community is part of the fabric of the broader community, and businesses cannot thrive. They can't do what it is that they want to do unless the community is thriving. And I think this is especially true. Banks are a good example of this. It's especially true of the business of banking. Banks have traditionally been cornerstones of their communities. They serve and they try to strengthen their communities where they're located, where their customers and their employees live and work. And to think back over the course of history, banks typically were located in the center of town, and they often had a special room, and it was called the community room. And that was a place for the community to gather and to talk about matters of common interest and to make big decisions. Those days are gone now, of course, with banking done very differently. But I think that spirit really remains, that spirit of community. So a cornerstone of a strong community is just a high-functioning system of justice, and a system that works fairly and works equally, and that people trust and have faith in, and one that protects the rights of its most vulnerable. So again, to take the example of Mid-Minnesota Legal Aid, it's been protecting rights and improving lives for over 100 years. But to me, really what it's been doing is building community. Yes, it does legal work, but it's really about building community and working further to equal justice. So I would make the case that supporting legal aid, which strengthens the system and promotes equal justice, is really a business imperative. Any business that's concerned with the health of its community, and every business should be, needs to be concerned about equal justice and needs to understand the critical role that civil legal aid plays in promoting that. So that's kind of how I think about the business case. In terms of my role and my peers' role in supporting legal aid, there are a number of things that we can do and do, and Ivan articulated several of them, but one of them is this great example of the letter that is done annually. This is, I believe it was originated with NLADA, and one of its lead authors, just to give full credit, is a guy named John Schultz, who's the general counsel of Hewlett-Packard Enterprise. But it's a terrific letter. It makes the case for legal aid, and we send it annually. This year we had over 150 different signatories, including myself and Ivan, just talking about the importance of legal aid and why businesses care about it, echoing some of the themes that I just described. And the feedback that we get on the letter is just terrific, to know that it matters and makes a difference. And when a congressional representative, for example, gets a letter signed by several large brand name companies from their district, they pay attention. So it really has an influence and does matter. And the case that's set out in the letter, and I commend it to your reading, is very eloquent. I did not write the letter, full credit to John, but it's just very well done. So anyway, I'll stop there, but thank you for the question.
Thank you. Thank you for the letter. And your discussion of community is a really good segue to the question I have for you, Tim. I want you to talk about how corporate leaders set their community impact activities. KPMG, where you were CEO for many years, made a major commitment to helping underrepresented groups confront systemic barriers to education, healthcare, and economic opportunities. And this is just a great thing. Tell us what that looks like in practice, and how is it determined that that would be a community impact priority?
Well, first, I agree totally with Jim that this is really important that we give back to the communities. Any business needs to have strong, healthy communities for their customers, for their employees, for all their stakeholders. And so I think to me, it starts with a business imperative to have that environment around you. And then how do you figure out what you do? So first of all, it has to be aligned, in my view, to the mission, the values, the vision, and the strategy of the organization. Because if it doesn't align to those, it won't be sustainable. And then it has to be sustainable for a long period of time. It can't be reactive to different issues of the day. And I think in modern times, some companies have reacted to different issues of the day, and they've lost the long-term vision what they're trying to accomplish in jumping from item to item versus a sustained, supporting, long-term view. Look at U.S. Bank and how long they've been involved in legal aid, et cetera. So that's the next part. And then third, you have to have clear, defined goals. What are you trying to accomplish? What impact are you trying to have? And then you have to have metrics to measure those goals and see how you're doing toward that success. Because you can't just have the ideas and the ambition, you have to have results as part of it as well. So you have to have those measurable goals, the metrics to drive it. And then you have to engage all stakeholders. And you have to engage them and inspire them to be part of it. And I think those are the key things as I look at what has made programs successful over time. Jim talked about the community bank going back a long time. History kind of repeats itself over time as well. JP Morgan is bringing back what they call community branches. There's 16 of them across the country in inner cities where people don't have access to finance education, might have access to legal aid, access to fair housing and how you finance. And within that community, having that branch bank there, they engage with the community leaders, they do education, they bring people in as a gathering point, and those 16 branches have really made a difference in the communities that they're in. It aligns to the mission of the bank, but also help for the community they're trying to drive as well. You know, the healthcare group where I'm on the board in the healthcare space, you know, it was very interesting. One day we were talking about healthcare and delivery and providers, and there was a person of diversity in the room and said, I've never had a doctor that looks like me in all my years of healthcare. You know, the healthcare group is investing $100 million to 2030 to change the diversity of care providers, lining up in partnerships with institutions, medical schools, et cetera, to make that happen. So again, important for them, but important for those constituents in the community as well. And at KPMG, just real quickly on that, I was there 32 years. I was in the leadership for 7, 8 years. I don't think much that I put in place is still there, but my lovely wife wanted to create a nonprofit organization to engage the spouses and partners of the partners. So flip it around a little bit, you know, instead of just thinking about the partners and the employees, how do we engage their broader families involved in something? And she created a program with another partner of hers called KPMG Family for Literacy. It's still running today. They've given over 7 million books out to underprivileged children. There's been 60,000 volunteers with KPMG involved in it, 161,000 people impacted. And much like the stats we talked about today, if children aren't literate, if they can't read, their chances of being incarcerated, their chances of not having a successful life go up exponentially. But if they can read and understand, it can change their lives. And through that program and that community, it really engaged the families of the organization, and they have more pride about being part of KPMG through the people who worked at KPMG. And I can go on other examples of what corporations have done, but to me, what you're doing in this vertical slice of very important things is wonderful, and we need to engage more people horizontally with you in that process.
Congratulations, Joe White. That's amazing. Thank you for that answer. Ivan, you served in so many roles in your career on public, private, government sectors. The last several years, you've led in-house departments at 2 major Minnesota brands, 3M and now Medtronic. 3M, under your leadership, was named Best Legal Department of the Year by the American Lawyer, in part based on the pro bono culture there. How do you nurture in-house commitment to pro bono, and what do you do to try and ensure that the members of your team continue their commitment to pro bono beyond your tenure at the company?
So I would start with the points that Tim and Jim have made, a bit of 3 legs of the stool. First, make it part of the mission. So Medtronic also is celebrating a milestone anniversary, 75 years. LSC is 50 years. And core to Medtronic is its mission, which was written back in 1960, and it includes the phrases, our purpose is to alleviate pain, restore health, and extend life. And there are 6 tenets in the mission, and ask any Medtronic employee, they can usually recite the phrase that I just mentioned. And my favorite tenet is tenet 6, which says, maintain good citizenship as a company. So that is an important part of Medtronic's culture, is to ensure that the company is a good corporate citizen. Then the business case is equally important. Global companies in particular need to decide where to invest, where to expand. And we look to expand in places where there is social stability, an environment, a community in which commerce, in which communities can grow and flourish. And to do that, I've observed 3 preconditions. There has to be a good rule of law, so contracts have to be enforced. We need to protect our intellectual property. We need access to justice for all the reasons that we've talked about. It's important that people feel that the justice system is something that they can trust and that they will get a fair shake, and an independent judiciary so that we can get a neutral way of resolving disputes. So that's the backdrop to how to build the program is through the company's broader values and mission. Operationally, the third leg of the stool has two pieces. One is leadership. The general counsel has to be vocal and talk about why it's important, encourage and support it, write the memos that answer people's questions about, what if I don't have insurance, or, am I allowed to do this? And secondly, set a good example so that people say, if Ivan can do it, you can do it. And that's, I take that to heart, right? I don't, that's not the reason why I do pro bono, but it is important that I don't just talk the talk, I have to walk the walk as well. And then the last part of your question about how do you sustain it? You sustain things by building mechanisms. It's very tactical, but it's so important to have a pro bono committee where you have strong leaders. It's important to show up at those committee meetings to continue to push the program forward. Metrics are very important. I've challenged our Medtronic team to increase the number of lawyers and paraprofessionals who participate in pro bono, or increase the number of hours. You have to reward and recognize the good work that's being done. It's important to do partnerships. I so appreciate the work when I was at 3M that we did with Smurls that went back many general counsel before me, many years, and thereby made it part of the tradition, part of the way you operate as a legal department. It's just expected. This is just something we do because it's so important to give back to our communities. I'll close with a final point. Your question about how do you ensure that it continues beyond your tenure, and I rationalized to myself, you can build great operating mechanisms, and it is true though, after you leave, it could fall apart. And it reminds me of a quote that is attributed to something that's on the wall of Mother Teresa's, I don't know if she has an office, but she has a room. And I'm paraphrasing, the title of the poem is called Anyway, and I really encourage you to look it up. It's a great poem, but there's a phrase that says something like, if someone comes after you and destroys what you have built, build it anyway. Build it anyway. Just do it, and then once you leave, it is out of your hands, but it will have been worth doing.
Thank you for that answer. You are a shining example. As the previous panelists have done, I'm going to close out with a call to action. I would like each of you to tell us one thing we can do tomorrow to be better advocates for access to justice and civil legal aid. I'll start with you, Jim.
I'm not sure I can help you with that because you're all doing great work already, but what I'm going to do personally tomorrow is better understand what the organizations I'm involved with are doing in this space and how I can help have them do more.
Thank you.
So, like New Year's resolutions, I think it's important to have modest ambitions. So when I say in answer to these questions, what can you do tomorrow, or what can in-house lawyers do tomorrow, it's really a very modest suggestion, which is to educate yourself. Read the LSC reports, raise awareness of this issue, remind others. I love, John Levy, your exhortation earlier this afternoon in which you said, this crisis is happening on our watch, and we can solve it in our time. So if you just say that to a couple of people tomorrow, I think that will go a long way. Vote, give money, support organizations that are here doing the hard work day in and day out, and thank them for the work they are doing.
Thank you. Last word, Jim.
Yeah, that was such a terrific list. The first thing I would say, I had the occasion to go onto the LSC website to in preparation for this panel. It turns out there's a little button at the top that says donate. So I would encourage everybody to go click on that button and support the LSC. Also, I would say just support the organizations out there doing the incredible good work all day, every day on the front lines, the amazing civil legal aid organizations. Support them with your time, with your treasure, contribute pro bono work, just in the way Ivan was describing. Consider joining a board if that's appropriate for you. Lots of these organizations have need for people just to be involved, just to be engaged. Call and write your elected officials. Just with the one example, we know that that can have a great impact. And then the last thing I would say is members of this thing we call the legal profession, take your professional obligation seriously. We are the stewards of the system, and we're the ones ultimately responsible for making it better and to aspiring to that ideal of equal justice.
Thank you so much, all of you, for all that you do and for being here today with us. Thank you.